Hey everybody, it is Monday, December 12th, 2022. Welcome to the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by Subway. Try the Subway Series menu, your pick of 12 irresistible subs. It's me, your man MG Marcus Grant, joined by Michael F. Florio and the specialist, cast of dozens that help us put on this show each and every day, each and every week. And that's it. The fantasy regular season, well, it's not officially over. There's still one more game to be played on Monday night. We've got the Patriots and the Cardinals, and we'll dive into that a little bit. But for all intents and purposes, the fantasy playoffs are upon us. How are we looking in terms of like leagues and playoff appearances and that whole thing?
So in like my 6 main leagues, I've made the playoffs in 5 of them, so I'm feeling good about that. I lost to you in Fantasy Live, so my bye chances went away there. I have 2 leagues that are coming down to points if I'm going to get the bye or not. So I need James Conner and Mac Jones to each get less than 18 for different leagues to get a bye.
So I had not done the permutations to see if I'm making the playoffs in the Fantasy Live League. I had to beat you. That was the first step.
I think you got in.
So I may be in now. So all right, so that's it. Like which means potentially that our defending champ Cynthia is out.
Yeah. Not only do I think you got in, I think Cynthia's out, and I think me and you run it back again in the first round of the playoffs.
We get to rematch it at the start of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, well, that'll be interesting. I'm in a few other leagues as well, but obviously for a lot of folks, it may come down to Monday night's game between New England and Arizona to determine whether or not you get into the playoffs. Of course, we'll have our biggest takeaways from the week. We'll have some waiver wire targets because that's going to be important for the folks that are in the playoffs, and we're going to have our fantasy playoff ride or dies, the guys that are absolutely, we believe, going to carry you to a fantasy championship. But let's get started with some fantasy headlines. Big news out of San Francisco over the weekend. Deebo Samuel left the game against the Buccaneers in the second quarter with what is believed to be a high ankle sprain. If confirmed via an MRI, Deebo could miss 4 to 6 weeks. So, Florio, that means he is essentially done for fantasy, barring some sort of miracle. For the 49ers, it's good news that he could be back for a playoff run. But for the rest of this 49er offense, from a fantasy perspective, what does this mean, not having Deebo?
I think it means that you could trust George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk a little bit more, because we were saying on the podcast and everywhere, we were talking about it last week, that like Deebo and CMC were the 2 that we trusted. And pre-Deebo getting injured, that was the 49ers offense. Like, it was a ton of Deebo both in the air and on the ground. Christian McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey. He's going to do his thing. But after he left, I mean, we saw Kittle finish with 5 targets, Ayuk with 3. It was a game they didn't have to throw a whole bunch. But mostly I feel better about Kittle because Ayuk is a bit boom or bust, I think, with Brock Purdy. But Kittle being a tight end, you probably still have to start him, and at least he gets a target boost here now. Yeah,
it was interesting to watch early because the thing I believed, which is what it looked like, is that McCaffrey and Samuel were 2 guys that it's easy to scheme touches for, and that's what we saw a lot of. We saw runs, short passes to both of those guys. Now, unfortunately for Deebo, he got hurt on a run up the middle, which I don't know if you saw. Jerry Rice put something on Instagram saying, "Stop running our best players up the middle." Jerry has seen enough. After Trey Lance gets hurt, Garoppolo gets hurt, Deebo gets hurt. Jerry Rice has spoken up, and he has had enough. I know we'll talk about waiver wire guys a little bit later in this show. Brock Purdy, any interest in Brock Purdy as a waiver quarterback?
Yeah, so to give a sneak peek behind like the start 'em sit 'em article column, I start writing it on Sunday night, and with it being the playoffs now, I'm gonna include like a little streamer for each position as well. Brock Purdy is the quarterback streamer this week because, and I write, I'm like, it's not even about Purdy, it's about everything around him.
It really is about everything around him, but he's got a matchup with the Seahawks coming up on Thursday night, which could be interesting for him as well, especially after Sam Darnold had a pretty nice day against that Seattle defense. Dameon Pierce left Sunday's game against the Dallas Cowboys after suffering an ankle injury early in the fourth quarter. Pierce was seen in a walking boot after the game. So does this mean we turn our attention to Eno Benjamin now?
I wouldn't be bold enough to do it unless you're really in need of a streaming running back or something like that. Like Eno Benjamin is a type of player that should be getting run in a consolation bracket, not in like your actual league playoffs. And like Dameon Pierce, as good as he's been, his ceiling the last 6 weeks in this current Texans offense is like 11, 12 fantasy points. So I don't know. And then you look at their schedule, the Chiefs, the Titans, the Jaguars, like I mean, two of those matchups are favorable, but like, do you really want to start Eno Benjamin in this offense with your season on the line?
I think the difference between the two of them really is sort of the talent profile, because Pierce was a guy that had that profile. He was sort of the scouting darling. He got a lot of attention going through the draft process. Benjamin has been a nice piece, but he's always been a complimentary piece wherever he was. And so the matchup might be great, but you're also talking about just a disparity in talent between Pierce and Benjamin. And when you're talking about an offense that's bad, that's probably going to be playing from behind. I know they were leading. They had a really good chance to win that game, surprisingly. But generally speaking, the Texans are going to be playing from behind, which doesn't really seem to favor Benjamin when it comes to game scripts.
Spoiler alert. They'll probably be playing from behind.
They'll probably be playing from behind again. I'm just against the Chiefs. I suspect that's going to be happening this week. The Broncos may have an issue at quarterback. Russell Wilson suffered a concussion against the Kansas City Chiefs in the fourth quarter on Sunday. Brett Rippon is the backup, and he is set to start should Russell not be cleared for Denver's Week 15 matchup against the Cardinals. Now, Jerry Jeudy had himself a day yesterday, a hat trick of touchdowns. Courtland Sutton, will see what his status is after he missed this past week. How does this affect that Broncos passing game and those pass catchers if there is no Russell Wilson?
It definitely hurts them, and I think that's saying a lot given how Russ and that offense have played. It was unfortunate because Russell Wilson was having one of his better games as a member of the Denver Broncos. It was cool that the fans still gave him an ovation as he left the field, even after what they've been through this season. That being said, I know it's a favorable matchup next week against the Cardinals. It's one of those things, again, that unless I don't have other options, I don't really want to go down with my team with Jerry Jeudy catching the ball from Brett Ripken in the fantasy playoffs.
That's the thing. And this was a week that I don't think anybody was really on Jerry Jeudy or really on any of the Broncos pass catchers just because the offense had been so bad. So for those of you who were in a situation where you started him, maybe you were forced to start him, congratulations. I don't know that I'm super excited about next week if it is Brett Rippon at quarterback. We'll see. Now, of course, we'll monitor all week long and see what Wilson's progress is as he goes through the concussion protocol, but it looks bleak for an offense that's already been pretty bad this season. So those are some of the things we are anticipating during the week. Let's talk about some of the things that we figured out as we watched football on Sunday, our 5 biggest takeaways. And for you, what's the first one?
Zonovan Knight is officially the Jets' RB1. And I know you could have been like, well, I thought we knew that the last couple of weeks, but there was always the caveat of until Michael Carter returns, and then we're going to really see. And Michael Carter returned yesterday. They split the snaps pretty evenly, but Zonovan Knight had 17 carries and 2 targets compared to Michael Carter's 5 carries and 6 targets. Obviously, Carter has a role in the passing game, but Zonovan Knight is going to get the bulk of the touches on the ground. He's the back that they use in the red zone and near the goal line, and he is a power runner. They found something here with him. There was multiple, I'm a Bills fan. There was multiple times yesterday where I was like, how did 4 Bills touch this guy and he's still running? He's that good. So I think Zonovan Knight, you could officially trust him moving forward even with Michael Carter back.
It's going to be interesting in that backfield because my fear is that it turns into something of a committee that they at least, but hopefully it's a situation where we know what the roles are, that Carter is sort of the passing down back, Knight is the running back. At least that way we can sort of determine how we want to use these guys and when we want to use them. Side note, what happens next year when Breece Hall is healthy and you've got potentially 3 running backs that you have to cycle through?
I guess that's a good problem to have.
It is a good problem to have, and it's one that we don't have to worry about until August, so let's not even bother with that. For me, Trevor Lawrence has arrived, and you can bring the rest of that Jaguars passing game with him, but he has been outstanding for the last few weeks. He's got 20 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. You go back over his last 5 games, he's got 10 touchdowns, no interceptions. Now, mind you, that 1-2 Zay Jones right there probably should have been picked off, but it wasn't. That's the important part. But he's looking more and more like that, quote, generational talent that we were expecting him to be. And it really is spreading around to all the rest of the Jaguars. When you see guys like Evan Ingram having huge days and Zay Jones having huge days, to the point that, look, they didn't really get much out of Christian Kirk, and they didn't really miss it. This is an offense that's getting really hard to defend because the quarterback is distributing the ball on time and accurately, and there's a lot of different places to go with it. So Trevor Lawrence, right now, I mean, he's a QB1 in terms of his statistics, and I think he's a QB1 going for the rest of the season.
And originally, I was like, oh, next week against the Cowboys, that's probably a game I want to get away from. And then I looked more into him, and I was like, he's playing so well right now that I cannot tell people to sit him, even in what looks to be like a tough matchup.
That's the thing. I mean, the schedule the rest of the way is not particularly favorable, but he's playing really, really well right now, to the point that I can't even make him a sleeper anymore. He's just a guy that you probably want to start.
And I think you start Evan Ingram next week. I think I'm planning on starting Zay Jones if I don't get the bye in a couple of leagues next week. They're just rolling right now.
They are absolutely rolling. Anything else that you learned from the weekend?
J.K. Dobbins is back in our fantasy lives and our starting lineups. Yesterday, what he did was very impressive. He played only 43% of the snaps as they got Edwards and Kenyon Drake involved, but he had 15 carries, no targets. I wish he was more involved in the passing game, but he went for 120 yards and a touchdown. That's 18 fantasy points in all leagues, standard, half point, it doesn't matter. And then next week, he gets the Cleveland Browns, who have been ran all over this season. We just saw Mixon and P. Ryan have a good game against them. I think J.K. Dobbins is someone that you can start in the fantasy playoffs, and I never would have thought I'd be saying that.
It's weird because he came in, he kind of got off to a decent start, got hurt. We hadn't seen him for a while. Now he's back, and he looks like the J.K. Dobbins we've been waiting for to break out for a while. So that is definitely good to see. But while we're excited about J.K. Dobbins, we are less excited about Mark Andrews. Right now, he's a Jag. He's just a guy, which is not what we were saying about him at the start of the year when he was still going neck and neck with Travis Kelce. But really, since the injury, he just has not been great. You look over the last 6 games or so, no more, just one game with more than 4 receptions, no more than 63 yards in any one game. He hasn't scored a touchdown in quite a while. You see that, no touchdowns in 6 straight games. Longest since he was a rookie in 2018. And when you throw in the fact that we're not certain about the Ravens quarterback situation, right? Well, we don't know if Lamar Jackson is going to play this week. Tyler Huntley left the game on Sunday with a concussion, so it might be down to Anthony Brown. It's at a point where it's hard to get away from Andrews because of the talent, and the ceiling potentially is high, but it's also getting hard to just straight up say, yes, start the guy, because the production hasn't been close to being there lately.
Yeah, and for a while we were saying, tight end, there's 2 good ones. No, there's one consistent good one, and it's Travis Kelce. Mark Andrews, I don't even think is the tight end 2. I tweeted out yesterday, I think you could make a case that Dalton Schultz, you'd rather have him than Mark Andrews right now. And there's, Dallas Goedert's going to be coming back. You could make a case for him. It's bad right now for Mark Andrews.
Dalton Schultz, you mentioned Dallas Goedert, TJ Hawkinson. Mm-hmm. There are a handful of guys that you would start, if you had them, could start over Mark Andrews at this point. But you do still have some tight end optimism, huh?
I was going to say the good thing about Mark Andrews struggling is that we have some players ascending and making the tight end position deeper. David Njoku had a really big game this week. He is someone that I think you can start with confidence moving forward. Evan Ingram continues to see big volume each week. I think right now you kind of just got to start Evan Ingram, and then Chig Okonkwo, who became a popular streamer as the week went on fantasy Twitter. He came through with a touchdown. He, I would argue, outside of Treylon Burks, is the Titans' best big play threat. So he is always going to be in play as a streaming option now. For a little bit, it looked really bleak, like tight end was going to give us maybe 2 good weekly options. But we're starting to see some of the depth guys come through and be able to trust them with more confidence.
I will say, I think you're being sort of generous when you say getting deeper. I would tend to say tight end is just less bad than it was before.
Probably the same. Probably fair. I mean.
It's less bad, but it's nice to have some guys that we feel like we can go to. And a lot of these guys are still widely available on waiver wires. I know Okonkwo is out there. I think Evan Ingram is still available in probably 60% of leagues, something like that. So take a look. If you need a tight end, at least go take a look, because there's a chance that those guys could be available for you. We're just getting started here on this show. We're going to come back, talk about some of the top performers, plus the guys who broke our hearts in Week 14. That's next on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. Top performers for Week 14. Trevor Lawrence had himself a day. Wow, I'm looking at this. There are 4 guys with 30-plus points. I don't know when the last time that has happened. It had to have been a while. But Trevor Lawrence with 33.
Would you ever guess that Trevor Lawrence, Jerick McKinnon, and Evan Ingram would be 3 of the 4?
No, never, ever, ever. 33.4 for Lawrence with the 3 passing touchdowns. Also had a rushing score. Jerick McKinnon, 112 receiving yards, couple of receiving touchdowns, 32 points for him. Justin Jefferson, I mean, he's just doing Justin Jefferson things, 33.3. Evan Ingram, nearly 40 fantasy points, 11 catches, 162 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Kaimi Fairbairn, 3 field goals that got you 15 points, and the Chiefs defense with 15 points. Probably could have been more, except they let their foot off the gas. They were up, 27-0? And the Broncos came back and actually made that a game at one point.
Yep. Mahomes, turnover syndrome. He threw 2 picks yesterday.
Yeah, it was nervous time for Kansas City after what looked like it was just going to be a blowout early on, but they let their foot off the gas and the Broncos came back. Let's talk about some of the top performers, though. A guy who wasn't on the list but had a good day nonetheless, Ezekiel Elliott. And I know we keep going around and round with the Cowboys backfield there, but 62 rushing yards, a touchdown, 3 catches as well, 17 fantasy points. I mean, I think we're at a point, though, where we're comfortable starting both of these Cowboys backs now, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've reached the point where, for me, Tony Pollard's an RB1 that you start each and every week. Since week 7, when he's been getting more involved, he's been a top 10 running back in all but 2 weeks. But Zeke Elliott is still plenty productive. While I think he's more of an RB2, he doesn't have the same ceiling as Tony Pollard because there's not the big play there. I would argue that the floor is kind of safer because he is going to get his carries on the ground. He's the back that they're going to use near the goal line. You know, he can bottom out if he doesn't get a touchdown, but I'm with you. I think you start both of these backs moving forward.
I feel like they have not only learned to coexist, I think they complement each other because Zeke is not the explosive player Pollard is, but I also think Pollard is probably better in limited doses. We know he can get a lot of carries. We saw that when Zeke was hurt, but I think the Cowboys would prefer not to use him that way. DJ Chark, we've talked about the Lions receivers all week long. I mean, we know how good St. Brown is. You mentioned Jameson Williams, which, by the way, if you want to take that victory lap, please do.
I was planning on doing so on Fantasy Live if they let me. But
you should
I'll celebrate it any way I can.
Absolutely.
Jameson Williams caught a long touchdown, and I don't know of anyone else who was really hyping him up.
That was the bold prediction for the week, and it hit early, too.
Thank God.
Got that out of the way early for him. But DJ Chark also had a pretty nice game, 6 catches, 94 yards, and a touchdown. That's back-to-back games with 90-plus yards for DJ Chark. And this passing offense in Detroit is starting to get going. And Chark right now is looking like a really nice compliment to Amon-Ra St. Brown there.
Yeah, he is. And he is a receiver that, at least until we see Jameson Williams really come in and start to play a bunch of snaps and kind of push Chark out, he is a good streaming option in the right matchup, which is exactly what he had last week. Unfortunately, he's probably going to get a lot of Sauce Gardner or DJ Reed next week against the Jets. On the road, I would look to avoid a lot of my Lions next week.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit of a different story, but the last 2 weeks they've had good matchups and they have absolutely exploited them. So if nothing else, DJ Chark should be added. Even if you're not starting him this week, he should be on rosters across fantasy. Marlon Mack. So Bob Harris, who we all know, great, one of the smart, nicest guys in the industry, does a weekly radio show, and I was fortunate enough to be a guest on it this past weekend. And one of the questions that I fielded was somebody needed to start 2 players between. It was like Marlon Mack, Trent Sherfield, Daniel Bellinger, and there was one other that was just like, bruh. And we both said, Bob and I said, I don't think I'd start Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack had 15 rushing yards, 62 receiving yards, and a touchdown. One really big, huge play. So to that caller, I apologize for not telling you to start Marlon Mack. We're not starting Marlon Mack again, though, right? This was just a thing that happened. This isn't something we can hang our hat on.
Yeah, I'm not starting Marlon Mack. I'm not picking up Marlon Mack unless I'm in a super deep league, which it sounds like that caller was. What I think this does is I think this makes Latavius Murray unusable as well because you're going to have Murray, Mike Boone, and Marlon Mack splitting reps on the league's worst offense. At that point, you just have to avoid it, I would say.
Yeah, it was Mike Boone, Marlon Mack, Trent Sherfield, and Daniel Bellinger were the 4 options.
I would have probably trusted Mike Boone over Marlon Mack.
We I said Sherfield and Bellinger. Bob said Boone and Bellinger. We both said Marlon Mack's not the answer, and we were wrong. So apologies there. Jerry Jeudy, though, talked about him. The huge game, 3 receiving touchdowns there. In fact, that means Russ threw 3 touchdowns in the game. after we were, on touchdown to toilet watch. That gap has closed significantly. But does this mean we're back in on Jerry Jeudy? Are we excited? Now, obviously, Brett Rippon pending, but does this mean we can have faith in Jeudy again?
Maybe if Russell Wilson's able to play next week against the Cardinals, but I don't want to go with Brett Rippon throwing the ball to Jeudy. It was a great moment for Jeudy, who honestly could have been ejected before any of those touchdowns because he lost his mind, ran into a referee, but then it Super Saiyaned him because he went out and caught 3 touchdowns after that. Good for him, but this seems like one of those games where next week he'll chase the points and he'll have a normal Jerry Jeudy game where he gives you 8 fantasy points.
That's sort of the fear there. So I'm not in on him, and especially if it's Brett Rippon at quarterback, I think I'm out on Jerry Jeudy. Speaking of going Super Saiyan, Evan Ingram, my goodness. And he's the guy that I had written up several times this year as a sleeper in the sleepers column. But, I'm thinking, Evan Ingram gets you a good day. He's he gets you 15 points. And that's a huge day for him. He went out and got you 39.2 fantasy points. And we talked about Trevor Lawrence and what this means. The Jags offense, these pass catchers are really making plays. And now not only are they fun to watch, but they're actually kind of explosive too.
Yeah, and I think next week, again, the floor is low with an Evan Ingram, but the ceiling we're seeing is very high. He has a touchdown in 2 straight games. He's got 22 targets in his last 2 games combined. Obviously, this is going to be his best game of the season, maybe his best game of his career, but the Cowboys are a matchup where I think the Jaguars are going to have to throw. Travis Etienne has been struggling. The Cowboys are great up front against the run, and they probably might be chasing points against this Cowboys offense. So Evan Ingram, you could do a lot worse at tight end, I would say.
Absolutely. I do wonder how Giants fans feel about this, watching Evan Ingram just go bananas down in Jacksonville.
Probably not great.
Probably not great. Probably not great at all. Those are the guys who lifted you up. How about the guys who let you down? It's time for our biggest disappointments of the week. And who broke your heart this week?
DeAndre Swift, because I said I don't know how many times last week that if DeAndre Swift is getting 20 opportunities in a given week, he is a must start, and he had 20 the week before. And then he went out and he had just 10 opportunities, finished with 39 yards, played only 34% of the snaps. Justin Jackson was heavily used again, playing a third of the snaps. Jamal Williams didn't go away. It's just frustrating because it looked like DeAndre Swift was healthy again and we could trust this guy. And now he feels like the ultimate tease in fantasy. And it's someone that I don't know if you can start him with much confidence moving forward.
It's so weird that you say that, because my disappointment was Jamal Williams. Because WTF Lions, what was happening with them on Sunday? Jamal Williams, who had been great all season long, he was the touchdown leader. You could count him when they got near the goal line. But on Sunday, we didn't see much of Jamal Williams in that offense either. I mean, he finishes the day with just 3.7 fantasy points, the 37 rush yards, no targets, doesn't get a sniff of the end zone. You mentioned Justin Jackson scores a touchdown. You know what was weird is that the Lions seem to get touchdowns to a whole lot of, that helps no one all-stars, right? It was Justin Jackson. I think Josh Reynolds had a touchdown in that game. So, your stars, right? Your DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, they don't find the end zone. All these other guys do. Meanwhile, you have the Eagles. They're just feeding all their guys, right? Miles Sanders scores. A.J. Brown, you get a touchdown. Devonta Smith, you get a touchdown. Jalen Hurts running in for a score. Nick Sirianni, you get it. We appreciate you. Dan Campbell, we got to have a talk, man, because, this is just not – I'm glad you won. You guys are in the hunt. You're fun to watch again. But, throw us a bone, right? We can – one hand washes the other. We can all get along. Everybody can have some fun if you just, give it to your good players and let them score touchdowns as well. Those were the mistakes that we made with our predictions. Now here are some of your mistakes. It's Rookie Mistakes presented by Snickers. We go to the Twitter machine and we find out the things that really grind your gears from the weekend, and we tell you whether or not you had good process or you just swung and missed completely. So let's start with this first tweet, this one from Brock. Playing Noah Fant instead of Dawson Knox. You know what? I'm okay with that. That was kind of a coin flip to me.
Yeah, I would play Knox next week if you made the playoffs and have the same decision, but I can't beat you up too much on that. Knox has been very frustrating this season to have in fantasy.
He really has. Last year he definitely scored a lot of touchdowns, which helped him. He's not doing that this year. So, look, between Dawson Knox and Noah Fant, you just kind of pick a name out of a hat, and that was the one you started. And unfortunately, it was Dawson Knox that scored the touchdown, and Noah Fant didn't do anything. But, I don't think you were completely crazy by making that decision. Next one. This comes from Tommy. DJ Moore over J.K. Dobbins likely cost me the playoffs. That hurts, but again, I don't think that was bad process there.
I would have done the exact. I'll take the DJ Moore L this week as well. I was like with Sam Darnold in a good matchup against the Seahawks. I expected better. He went out and did nothing. Unfortunately, cost you the playoffs, but because J.K. Dobbins looks like he's in a really good spot next week.
Speaking of teams not giving it to their best players to score touchdowns, the Panthers, I think Shi Smith caught a touchdown.
I thought he was DJ Moore because he was wearing DJ Moore's old number.
Raheem Blackshear scored a rushing touchdown when I thought it was like a Deontay Foreman week. But again, DJ Moore had been playing well with Sam Darnold. The matchup seemed good. J.K. Dobbins was coming back over injury. So I understand, Tommy. Yeah, that was not a bad process there. It just didn't work out. Next tweet. Trenton starting ETN over literally anyone else. Yeah, I don't know. Travis Etienne had been hard to get away from. I didn't love the matchup. I'll say that. I did not love the matchup, but I also understood starting him. It was just hard to get away from him right now.
Yeah, with 6 teams on bye especially. What I get upset about is that, look, Doug Peterson is doing a lot right in Jacksonville, but I just wish they would throw the ball more to Travis Etienne because he's very good as a pass catcher. But no matter what any of these coaches that we're angry about, Zach Taylor's #1 for this week for not playing T. Higgins.
That was just, the whole T. Higgins thing, man. People are going to be salty about that for a long time.
I truly believe the league needs to start finding coaches who manipulate because otherwise we're just leading fantasy managers astray.
Fantasy managers, folks who live in the desert, you know what I mean? Just the whole thing. But starting Etienne, not a bad thought process. The matchup was bad, and I figured he would give you more than he actually did. Last one. This is from Grant Cummings, who says, thinking Kyron Williams was actually going to take over the Rams' backfield this week. You're not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. Look, Cam Akers was left for dead. He scored 2 touchdowns, but then you're like, okay, but is that just a thing or whatever? And I can't figure out Sean McVay's line of thinking.
I would want to stay as far away from that backfield if possible, but if you're really desperate and you have to trust the Rams running back, it at least looks like right now Cam Akers is the guy. But again, take that with a grain of salt.
Spoiler alert, I'm in the very early stages of putting together my list of sleepers for the weekend. Cam Akers right now is on the list.
I get it. He's got a good matchup.
I may regret that by the time the week is over, but he's there for the time being. Those were the guys who hurt your heart. Next up, we're going to have some guys that maybe can lift your spirits heading through the fantasy playoffs. We're going to talk some waiver wire picks after the break on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. It's time for a Refresh Your Lineup presented by Subway. Florio, who are your top waiver wire targets for Week 15?
Brock Purdy, who gets a good matchup on Thursday night against the Seahawks. My top streamer this week would be Mike White, who gets the Detroit Lions next Sunday. And then Jared Goff. I don't love him this week against the Jets, but if you're looking down the road beyond Week 15, J.K. Dobbins, I know he's just in like 40% of NFL.com leagues, but I wanted to highlight him just to make sure people check he's out there. Zonovan Knight in a good matchup next week against the Lions. Jerick McKinnon, who gets the Texans next week. And then Chuba Hubbard, just to have a backup for Deontay Foreman on your roster. Some receivers, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who went off this past week. Jameson Williams, who is getting healthier and healthier. Chris Moore, who's playing the wide receiver 1 role in Houston. And Elijah Moore, because the Jets lost Corey Davis this past week as well. And then some tight ends, Evan Ingram, who we've talked about a lot. Greg Dulcich, who gets the Arizona Cardinals. And then Chig Okonkwo, who's been playing really well and gets a good matchup against the Chargers.
Yeah, you thought about Greg Dulcich. I mean, just like Cardinals. That's kind of all you need to say with that one. By the way, if you want more in-depth analysis on some of the waiver wire options, go check out Matt Okada's weekly waiver wire column. It's at NFL.com/waiverwire. But let's dive into some of these guys. You mentioned Jared Goff. Not a great matchup this week against the Jets. He had a big game on Sunday against the Vikings. Back to playing well again. We talked about the Jaguars offense picking it up. So is the Lions at this point. So Jared Goff, though, maybe down the line, some fantasy value in the playoffs there.
Yeah, down the line. Jared Goff, look, remember we were talking about home road splits for Kirk Cousins? Mm-hmm. Jared Goff takes him to an extreme. He's yet to score 15 fantasy points on the road. Meanwhile, he scored over 15 in every home game this year. This is a road game for him against a really tough Jets defense. I would look to avoid him this week, but if you have the bye or maybe you're just streaming quarterbacks looking ahead, he gets the Panthers in week 16 and then a home game against the Bears in championship week. So I definitely think there's times when you can use him down the road. It's just not this week.
It's weird. Jared Goff has kind of bookended the season, right? He came out of the gates hot, sort of went away from him, and now late in the season, we're turning our attention back to Jared Goff again. We're also turning our attention to Jameson Williams, which, look, if you want to take another victory lap, I'm totally down with that right now.
One was enough, I'll say.
Okay, we'll settle with one. But Jameson Williams, he's slowly working his way back into the offense, getting himself back into shape. And as you mentioned last week, the floor is low. That's something to keep in mind. But we've seen that he can be a big play threat. So it means that there's always a chance for a double-digit day for him.
Yeah, because exactly what he did yesterday. One catch, but it was a 41-yard touchdown. And then the thing is, he only played 19% of the snaps yesterday. But Dan Campbell last week said they're going to bring him along like they did cornerback Jerry Jacobs, who came back from a torn ACL. And with Jacobs, his first 2 weeks, he barely saw the field. Week 3, he played over half the snaps. And then like that 4th week on, he was just kind of set free. So I think this week we could see a big jump in snaps. I don't love Jameson Williams on the road in a tough matchup against the Jets, but those final 2 weeks, if he plays a lot of snaps next week, I think you can trust him in those final 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they bring him along, but we know the talent is there. Just need him to get healthy and be kind of integrated into the offense. Chuba Hubbard, I mentioned the Panthers, and I thought this was going to be a big Deontay Foreman week. They sort of used him late in that game, but it was a lot of Chuba Hubbard. Had the touchdown, had 3 catches as well. So, I mean, I don't know if I can figure out this backfield, but Chuba Hubbard should be added in weeks.
He is not a player I would want to start, but yeah, I agree. He's someone I want on my roster just in case of an injury or anything like that. This is the time of the year where bye weeks are now officially behind us, so you don't need as much depth at running back and receivers. Like, one backup in case of injury or tough matchups is probably enough, meaning that you have a couple of more some leeway with those final bench spots. And having your handcuffs is important this time of year in case of an injury. You don't want your playoff opponent now to have your backups the new starter because you're one of your running backs get hurt.
Exactly what that is. Now the other fear is that Raheem Blackshear somehow sneaks in there and takes some touches, but I think for the most part this is a Hubbard and Foreman backfield there. Talked about Chico Okonkwo a couple of times. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it here, but getting a lot of opportunity. And I mean, we'll see what happens with Treylon Burks, but look, we need tight ends. He's a playmaking tight end, so he's another guy that I think if you're streaming could have some value for fantasy managers.
Yeah, at least 5 targets in 3 straight games. He is a playmaker. He has multiple catches of over 40 yards this season. Not many tight ends can say that. And then his schedule, he gets the Chargers, the Texans, and the Cowboys. It's a pretty favorable schedule as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had a helmet catch. Not quite a David Tyree level helmet catch, but kind of a fun helmet catch nonetheless. Donovan Peoples-Jones, yesterday we had kind of a limited Amari Cooper, but DPJ, who I liked as a sleeper, 8 catches, 114 yards, 19 fantasy points against the Bengals. And the quarterback change here I think has a lot to do with this because now you have a guy who, even if Deshaun Watson's still working his way back, he does give you more of a vertical option than you had with Jacoby Brissett.
And that's exactly the case. The ceiling, I just think, is much higher. And DPJ has been very reliable for fantasy this season, but he's been more of like a floor type of guy. But we know that he brings high upside as a field stretcher here. Now he's got a quarterback who, again, he's still working his way back, but Deshaun Watson, just watching him and the numbers he put up this past week, he obviously took a step in the right direction from what he was a week ago. DPJ, definitely someone that you could stream the rest of the way.
Yeah, if you were in a deep league or maybe some wide receiver help or whatever, then DPJ should be considered there. If you're adding guys, it means you got to be dropping guys. So let's take a look at some players you can drop. I need to spend a ton of time on it, but who are you saying goodbye to?
Derek Carr, who had been playing well up until this past week, then he scored fewer than 3 fantasy points. And now you look at his schedule, he gets the Patriots this week. That's a game I would try to get away from him in. Then he gets the Steelers on the road. I don't love that matchup. The Steelers defense is much different when Fitzpatrick and Watt are out there. And then the Niners to end the season. So 3 tough matchups to end the year for a player that's his ceiling is like 20 fantasy points at the quarterback position. There's better options out there.
Definitely a lot of better options out there at quarterback. And for me, Tyler Conklin, who started the year hot and has really just continually faded as we've gone later into the season. And I don't know that the change to Mike White helps him out. It's helped Garrett Wilson. It's helped Elijah Moore. I don't think it really has had the same effect for Tyler Conklin. He's much more of a short passing game option, kind of an extended handoffs guy. He doesn't also give you the yards after catch that you get with, say, some of the other tight ends like George Kittle, Travis Kelce, etc. So the floor has gotten a lot lower. The ceiling was never particularly high. I think if you're looking to stream tight ends, there are better options out there than Tyler Conklin. We are going to get into our playoff ride or dies because this is when it really matters in fantasy. So these are the guys we think can carry you all the way to championship glory. We'll talk about those after the break on the NFL Fantasy Football Show.
Got to work on the wire, folks.
Yeah,
you got to be
wire.
consistent with your work on the wire. Don't relax when you have a good team.
I'm old and I'm a dad, so no, I didn't do anything at all. Although I'm going to take the kid trick-or-treating tonight. That should be a whole lot of fun.
I'm going to give him for 275 passing yards in that range.
Those are our starts and sits for the week. If you want more, of course, you can always go check it out at NFL.com/start and sit. NFL Plus is here, which means no matter where you are, this is how you football. You can stream live, local, and primetime games on your phone or tablet, 45-minute game replays with NFL Plus Premium, and more. This is the NFL for every fan. This is football freedom. This is your game on the go. Go to plus.nfl.com and sign up now. We got some fantasy playoff ride or dies. These are the guys that we would have in our lineups no matter what, because the matchups are good, because they are good, and we think these guys are going to help you on your way to winning a fantasy title this year. So we got 5 of them all together. Florio, who is the first one for you?
Garrett Wilson, who had a really funny moment yesterday when they were like, hey, your coach says you're going to play the Bills again. And he's like, I don't really know the schedule, but I thought this was the final time we play them this year. But I know he disappointed a little bit yesterday. He's still clearly the focal point of the Jets passing game with Mike White especially. And then to end the season, he gets the Lions, who give up a bunch of production to receivers, the Jaguars, who give up a bunch of production through the air, and the Seahawks, who they've been struggling as well against receivers. So I think Garrett Wilson, who's been up and down a lot this year, he's going to get hot. He's going to win some people their fantasy leagues.
I think it's funny that, I'm sure players don't know the schedule the way that we do, because they literally are looking 1 week at a time, and they're probably not even looking at names of opponents, just numbers and positions. Like they aren't studying this the same way we are, because they don't have to. For me, Jonathan Taylor. And we've talked over and over this season about how you probably spent the number 1 overall pick in your league on Jonathan Taylor, and he has let you down from that perspective. But the schedule the rest of the way is so good for him. He's got the Vikings. He's got the Chargers. They've been bad against the run pretty much all year long. The Giants recently have started to get gashed on the ground. We saw that with Miles Sanders and Jalen Hurts running the football effectively on Sunday. So this is an opportunity for Jonathan Taylor to really sort of get right, especially in an offense that is struggling to protect its quarterback, that's having issues along the offensive line. I think the way to sort of do that is let your big, bruising, talented running back get the football, let him run it at the opposition a little bit, and then try to prosper that way. So Jonathan Taylor, while he may not have been the guy you thought you were drafting, could be the guy that ends up, in the end, kind of helping you win a championship. Next one on your list here.
I'm going to go with another rookie here because it's been a theme in past years where a rookie will get hot late and really win people championships. And Christian Watson is well on his way to doing so. He's a must-start option. We know that. He brings so much big playability with what he can do downfield as a field stretcher, what he could do after the catch, and what he could do in the red zone as their go-to guy there. But then you look at his schedule. He gets the Rams next week. That they've really been struggling as of late on defense. Then Dolphins in what could be a high-scoring game. And then the Vikings in what is probably the best matchup for a wide receiver right now. We just saw every wide receiver outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown score a touchdown against them yesterday. So Christian Watson, if you have him right now, obviously you know to start him. But his upside is so high and those matchups are so good that I think he can lead a lot of people to a championship.
I mean, it's come a long way from that drop in week 1 when everybody sort of pointed and laughed and wondered what the Packers were doing. Since then, nothing but greatness for Christian Watson. I'm going to stay in that same division, but I'm going to go over to the Minnesota Vikings. And I like Dalvin Cook down the stretch. And he's another running back that you probably spent a high draft pick on who has sort of underwhelmed to this point in the season. But A lot like Jonathan Taylor, the matchups are really good for him. He's got the Colts, he's got the Giants, and he's got the Packers in championship week. So not only is that a big game with a defense that has struggled against the run, for the Vikings, it could mean a lot because they are very much trying to jockey for seeding. We'll see if maybe do they still compete for a 2 seed and a bye in that first week of the playoffs. We'll see. So these games are going to mean a lot for Minnesota. We know Justin Jefferson's going to be fine, but I think they're going to have to get Dalvin Cook going on the ground as well. And these are the kind of games where you can see it happen. So maybe we see Cook really start to turn up in the last few weeks of the fantasy campaign. One last one as a bonus. Who's your ride or die for this last one?
Justin Herbert, who for the last couple of weeks we've been saying like he has the potential to make up for his early season woes by getting hot and potentially leading people to championships. And in the last month, he's averaged 21.5 fantasy points per game. He's thrown for at least 330 yards in 2 straight games. It's remarkable how different this offense can look when the people who are getting paid to be their top playmakers are actually healthy and on the field at the same time. And then next week he gets the Titans, who you could throw all over. Then he gets the Colts, who I know they've been tough on receivers, but you could still he can have success against them. And then the Rams, who again have been struggling mightily as of late. I really think Justin Herbert, we're going to forget about what he did early on in the middle of the season when he was hurt and all of his playmakers are hurt, because people who have him and who stuck with him are going to be too busy winning their fantasy leagues.
Side note, I just like the fact that the Rams and Chargers play each other since they both share the same stadium. I just think it's kind of fun. It's sort of like when the Lakers and Clippers play and, one of them gets to be the home team, but they both are in their locker rooms. I know it doesn't mean anything. I'm just weird like that. I think it's cool. Anyway, those are our ride or dies for the fantasy playoffs. Start them and prosper. You can thank us for it later. Not done, though, because we got the Madden movers coming up, the guys who we haven't got that chance to talk about yet on this show. We want to give a little bit of love to, so we'll hit those after the break on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. Saturday football returns to the NFL on December 17th, and NFL Network is your home for an exclusive triple header. The Colts take on the Vikings at 1 p.m. Eastern, followed by Ravens-Browns at 4 p.m., then a huge divisional showdown in prime time as the Dolphins battle the Bills at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's a big-time triple header all day next Saturday, only on NFL Network and streaming on NFL+. Time to close out the show with our Madden movers, where we think we think there are some players that deserve a boost on the digital side of things because of what they did this past weekend. So we'd like to just show some folks some love. So for you, who's the first guy who deserves a video game bump?
Zay Jones. Look, he's an 80 right now, and I think a lot of people might say that's fair, but then you saw what he did this past week, catching the touchdown, getting the toes in. He had 12 targets this past week. He has at least 10 in 3 of his last 4 games, and in that other game, he has 7. So he is getting so much safe, consistent volume that I think you need to start him. Like next week, unless I get the bye, fingers crossed, I'm going to have to decide in the league, Mike Evans versus Zay Jones, and I'm leaning towards Zay Jones as of right now.
Ooh, that's spicy. But not completely crazy, but definitely spicy. Yeah, it's weird because coming into this year, people made fun of the Jaguars for spending a lot of money to bring in Christian Kirk. They get Zay Jones. Everybody's like, whatever. He's kind of a journeyman, bounced around. But these two guys have been really integral to their success this year. So kudos to the Jacksonville front office for doing a good job scouting wide receivers. The weather's getting colder, even in Southern California. It was like, below 50 degrees when I woke up this morning, which I know there are people in the Midwest who are probably flipping me off right now.
That is freezing for here.
It's freezing for here. It's slow cooker season, right? I like to get out the crock pot. I like to make soups and that sort of thing. Meanwhile, up in the Bay Area, the Brock pot is cooking. Brock Purdy had himself a day. Threw for 2 touchdowns, ran for 1 more, and just slow-cooked Tom Brady and the Buccaneers in a big win for the 49ers. He's only a 60 right now. It's because, that's because nobody had seen the Brock pot. He had been in the cabinet, tucked away, covering, gathering dust because they hadn't needed to use him. But Kyle Shanahan brought him out. He's cooking up some nice ingredients there, just slow sautéing opponents there with the Brock pot. So I think he deserves some love. Who knows? Who knows what happens if he keeps this rolling? He's got a big game on Thursday night. But for now, he's hot. Let the dude cook. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, he definitely deserves a boot. I mean, he's on a Super Bowl favorite right now. He deserves. Plus, speaking of slow cookers,
Yeah.
I don't get any of the credit, but yesterday for like 8 hours, Nicolette had pulled pork in the crock pot, and it just smelt amazing while watching football.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I should have come by your house yesterday.
We got leftovers.
Oh, sweet. I'm going to be by later. Who else deserves a Madden bump this week?
I think Chris Moore deserves a bump, and a lot of you might be like, who? And I understand why, because he's not a big name or a player that we've really been talking up at any point this season, but he went out yesterday, had 11 targets, caught 10 of them for 124 yards. And this isn't like it came out of absolute nowhere. Chris Moore's had a couple of big games this season. Like he had another game where he had a touchdown. But the whole thing is like Nico Collins is banged up right now. Who knows if we see Brandon Cooks at all again this season. So in their place, someone has to catch the ball, and he is the Texans' wide receiver 1 right now.
Yeah, it was weird because Jeff Driscoll threw a touchdown, and I was like, I had to Google where Jeff Driscoll was. I didn't know who he was playing for. Him threw a touchdown to Amari Rodgers, and I'm like, I don't know what team those guys play for right now.
It makes me question what we were doing with Kyle Allen, because at least Jeff Driscoll can run.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. But Chris Moore did have himself a day, and if there is no Nico Collins this week or Brandon Cooks, then he very much is back in play for fantasy managers. I'm going to go with Marquise Goodwin because, look, we were excited to see DK Metcalf, work through an injury and get out there and play. Tyler Lockett had a nice day, but Marquise Goodwin got you 20 fantasy points, sort of out of nowhere. And so he deserves some love there because the Seahawks have been a really good, fun team to watch offensively. We know what Geno Smith has done. Ken Walker, when he's been healthy, has been outstanding. And yeah, sure, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, they do their thing. But to see Marquise Goodwin, who, by the way, has Olympic-level track and field talent, get out there and make some plays, that was very cool. So he's a 75 overall. I should check to see what his speed score is because I would imagine it's pretty high. But either way, he deserves a bump after this past week.
The best part about everything that Marquise Goodwin has done this week, and, he's been contributing, is that, it's not like he's eating into Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf's production. Kudos to Geno as well. He's keeping everyone afloat right now.
That is kind of amazing. Didn't think that would happen. And just to think that this team was going to try to roll with Drew Lock this year had everything broken the way Pete Carroll was hoping. Just a reminder, it's week 15 pretty much, so hopefully you know this by now. But if you subscribe to one of our shows, you get all 5 of them. That's the NFL Fantasy Football Show, the Q&A Show, the Stardom Sit-em Show, and you can, of course, find us streaming in the NFL Fantasy app, on the NFL Fast channels, and at youtube.com/NFL Fantasy Football. By the way, you can also check out NFL Fantasy Game Day on Sunday mornings as well. In the meantime, for us, that is it. We are done. We appreciate you hanging out with the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by Subway. Try the Subway Series menu, your pick of 12 irresistible subs. You know the drill. Tell 2 friends to tell 2 friends. Rate, review, and remember, some people are so judgmental, and you can just tell by looking at them. Be safe, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.